recording.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Moral Economy. I'm one of your hosts, Eddie.
I'm also a host. Ciao.
I'm the silent member, Puja.
Who's not so silent?
And my name is Awaz. I'm also on this program.
Woo.
I am Frat. I am also somebody.
And I am Andrew. I'm nobody.
Today, everyone, we are going to do something a little different. We're just going to talk about headlines. We're just going to talk about what's on the news, maybe what's not on the news, and try to give a bit of a deeper perspective on it. Anyone want to start with anything?
I guess, Eddie, that's you.
You wanted to address the French.
Yeah. Well, that's something that's been on my mind. I've been talking to a lot of people about this. Both at work, I deal with a lot of new people all the time, and something that caught my attention and one motivation as to why we do this here at the Moral Economy with our podcast is that a lot of important things don't get reported on. Primarily, what I'm talking about is the protests that have been going on in France ever since, the climate conference a few months ago. Yeah,
Ever since November.
December.
Yeah, since December. Okay.
Actually,
November.
Actually, after the state of exception was declared,
Right.
when the president got the powers coming from this extraordinary situation that was extended for 3 months, and then it was extended again, I think.
Yeah, it was extended again for 3 months, and now it has been extended for another 2 months.
And how courageous of these protesters, and numbers I've heard is, numbering in hundreds of thousands, maybe even million people protesting all over France, and that they're doing this against the law, and they're still protesting, and they're creating shutdowns of public transport, electricity. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, something hasn't happened like this in decades, and still there's a media blackout.
Could you tell us a bit about what are they protesting? What is this law? Because I've heard about it, that it's this...
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to it. It's pretty much just neoliberal labor laws that the so-called socialist government in France is trying to push. And there's a lot of details to it. We're going to post some articles that reference them. But some of the things are just labor protection. So we're talking about making the labor week longer, making it easier for companies to fire people. If I'm not mistaken, making the retirement age older. What was the other one? Oh, making negotiations with companies, so owners, directly with the workers, circumventing the labor unions, possible. So it's really an attack on labor.
But if you ask, I'm sorry to cut you.
Right.
Speaking, if you ask the French Minister of Labor, she will ask the workers to show some economic patriotism and just suck it up. Do not protest against these laws because we know better than you. Show some patriotism.
Yeah, but again, what I think what Fira just alluded to, that it's sort of basically a product of the emergency powers that exist. So, as I understand it, these emergency powers empowered the executive to pass this law, or was this passed through the normal legislative procedure? Because if that was the case, then this implicits the whole legislature of France into something as criminal as what they've done.
So from my understanding, it hasn't passed yet. On June 14th, it's going to be debated.
Okay.
On the Senate floor, and there's going to be, as a result, big protests, as you can imagine. The, let's say, international community is somewhat aware of it. So if you go to the Rotaflora, for those of you that don't know, that are listening, the Rotaflora is one of the biggest squatted communities here in Hamburg. It's a cultural center in the Sternschanze neighborhood. And in front of it, there's a big banner. I sent it to all of you guys.
Yeah.
It's been there for a while.
Yeah, it's been there for a while. And it's just trying to organize a march to stand in solidarity with the protesters in France. Now, something we didn't mention was that it hasn't been for decades that both labor and the student movement have united against the government. Because of this, it's just created so much ruckus, let's say, all over France.
But I don't know. I was recently hearing about this. Of course, that this was gathering wide support from a diverse section of employees, workers in France. There were people, as diverse as automobile workers,
Yeah.
air traffic controllers, nuclear plant power workers,
Public transport employees.
yeah, public transport employees. So
Power plant, yeah, electricity.
yeah, and I think one of the arguments that I did remember listening to was that these people are out to destabilize France, which is already reeling back from a destabilization as a part of terrorist attack. So this was a clever ploy on part of the people who try to counter these people to somehow put them in the same sentence as they are putting these people with the devastating terrorist bombings in November.
Connect them to the
Yeah, they
terrorists
sort of said
somehow.
these people are on the same track as the people who destabilized France in November.
Right.
So, this tells you how
Conniving.
dark, how dark
Conniving the
is
French government is, yeah. And I don't know if you guys heard, I think it was yesterday on the news, they caught a guy in French national in Ukraine who was found with 100 kilos of dynamite and hundreds of weapons because he was plotting 15 different attacks in Paris for the European football championship. And he was an anti-Muslim. So here we're talking about a radical right-winger organizing a terrorist attack in Paris. So this is it blows the mind, how many different ways we could go about this with violence and just terrorism, I guess.
Yeah,
But again,
and it's so easy to just destabilize and label people.
Yeah.
X is a terrorist, Y is a terrorist.
Right, and so here we could have terrorists that are radical Islamists, terrorists that are radical anti-Islamist, terrorists that are radical leftists. Terrorism is such a big umbrella.
When the only terrorists are really the military and government and police actually killing people.
We're terrorizing people all over the world.
I mean, not the only terrorists, but also terrorists.
Also terrorists. They just not labeled it because they're the ones that give the labels.
They have the legitimacy of terror, let's say. To use the Bavarian term, they have the legitimacy in the use of terror. And so that's one of the things. And it's interesting that these protests are continuing despite, I think, some high-handedness from part of the government because they've been trying to get after these people, and this is like I think really big numbers. And in most of the cities, I've heard there were protest people in Lyon. I mean, of course, in Lyon, in Marseille, Marseille, whatever you pronounce it, and other smaller cities as well.
Yeah.
In solidarity with these people who are putting out huge numbers in Paris and Lyon and elsewhere. But also interesting is that just a few days from now, 4 to be exact, France is going to be the venue for the European football championships, right? And France is, of course, on a side note, France is also deeply troubled by recent floods.
Right.
Yeah, and a lot of its infrastructure has been damaged, especially in big cities like Paris. They've had traffic snarls. They have
closed down the Louvre.
Yeah, they've closed down the Louvre. They've closed down metro stations.
And to add,
life has been destabilized.
And to add, the last terrorist attack in Paris was during a France-Germany
game
friendly, and so I mean the security is going to be tight, and I wouldn't be surprised. There's going to be very little tolerance towards the protest movement by the police.
Yeah, and they're probably going to use this rhetoric of security, I think, to clamp down on these protesters because the European Championship is going to be going on. So these people are going to constitute a threat to public safety, and then they're going to be targeted against with probably much more legitimacy because currently, of course, I think these exceptional powers that the state has in case of emergency are being used against them, and I think these are going to further harshen these measures as the European Championship starts and when people start to come into France for the footballs.
Yeah.
When does that start?
10th. France plays Romania on the 10th. I think that is when it starts.
July?
10th of this month. 10th of June. Yeah.
In a couple of days.
Actually,
guys, we could go in many different directions, but one thing I'm thinking about that I find interesting is the rhetoric that the government spits back at people protesting against these labor reforms. They're saying look, these labor reforms are good for the economy. It makes companies more flexible in finding new employees. We could get the young to get more jobs. But of course, this is neoliberal rhetoric. And at the same time, we just did
flexible means you can be
disposable.
Disposable, right?
Yeah, and I think that's actually quite poignant to say because the IMF has recently come out in the past few months, but most recently, maybe a week ago,
Yeah, a week ago.
admitting that neoliberal policies around the world have failed, but yet we see that France is still trying to ram this kind of policy down the French
and
people.
all over the world.
Yeah, all over the world.
Yeah.
Right. But right now it's going on in France, and what people are right to protest. Why should they accept this?
Yeah, totally. I agree with that, and I think one of the wage sector of the economy, it's one of the key sectors, and which goes on to have serious implications. Because I think what differentiates, for example, the Anglo-American model of capitalism from the more European model of capitalism is the relative strength of workers' rights.
Right.
When you cross the Atlantic, if you're in the UK and the States, you have basically no recourse to law if your employer goes on and fires you. But over here,
I mean, with caveats, depends on the state. Historically,
but
wasn't the case.
largely, you could bracket it up. You have very limited protections under the law if you are subject to an arbitrary termination by your employer. But this is something that is totally unthinkable on this side of the Atlantic.
Yeah, that is true. It's unthinkable.
And this is one of those things that is constantly being a source of argument. Like if you look at the numbers, still on an average, the American worker is at least 2 times more, not 2 times, maybe. I don't know how productive, but an American worker is definitely more productive than a European worker. But here, on the European side, the Europeans have much more leisure time because of their restricted work weeks and because of their lavish retirement benefits
lavish.
that you get.
It's not lavish.
Lavish from the other side of the
from American perspective.
But I think this is one of those key elements that the neoliberal policies have been targeting, and they have sort of implemented these in other parts of the world where they've gone on to restructure public sector involvement in the economies.
Yeah, and I mean, we were just talking about this before the podcast. The precarity of the American worker is so unbelievable that what was that statistic you saw?
Yeah, 47% of American people would not be able to, draw up $400 in case of an emergency. If they were suddenly asked to draw an extra $400 from their bank accounts, they would not be able to do that.
Who did that stat?
This was quoted in Robert Wright's recent article that was published in 2020, 1st of May, somewhere there.
Robert Reich was the ex-Clinton labor minister.
Secretary of Labor for the Clinton, and as one of the most vocal critics of the American capitalism in its sense of breeding inequality.
Yeah.
And he's come out with this really great article that you should. I could totally give you a link to that, and you could read that, and how Trump, for example, the phenomena of Trump is basically the response to the increasing unequal society in America.
It's also interesting in the context of payday loans are still being used in the United States, and more people are using them, and which means that they're betting their paychecks against being able to somehow get money in order to pay off the loans later on.
Yeah, no, it's another big problem. I mean, I'm from Miami, and we have a lot of hoods, and if you go anywhere in the hood in Miami, what you find are quick cash stores. So that's pretty much stores where you can cash your checks, but at a high interest rate. You find liquor stores and you find pawn shops. That's what you find mostly in the hood. Yeah, and of course, because these kind of businesses target poverty, right? And that's just straight up exploitation.
And if I understand this correctly, this is all these shops are basically institutions of, indebting people, right?
Oh yeah.
That's the whole point. They need to get you into debt so that you always actually have to use them again.
So there's a
That's
cycle.
the whole point of the payday loan is that, okay, you don't have enough money before your next paycheck, so what they do is give you your paycheck, which you'll have to pay off later with interest, and of course you won't be able to pay that off later, because you're living paycheck to paycheck.
Totally. So it's sort of these antithesis as I see it, because you have better protections and better whatever living standards. I don't know. So we're gonna attack that. Coming from Washington, even if we have Christine Lagarde. She's French.
Yeah.
We're gonna use her institution, well, not her institution, but yeah, the rhetoric of her institution to come back at you. So this is kind of interesting, that this goes on and tells you that how unimportant people are when it comes to institutions, right? Even if Christine Lagarde is at the IMF, and even if she's coming from a European tradition of, say, economists, she's not being able to change much or significantly alter the discourse that the Washington-based institutions have been carrying out.
Good. Guys, are anything else we want to talk about that you found in your resources through the news that maybe is not spoken about in the mainstream?
The New York State, the move against
The
BDS.
BDS,
Oh, yeah. That was a
just
big
happened
move.
today, yeah.
That was
someone
a douchey move.
yeah, someone tell us about it?
So what's happened is the state of New York has passed an executive order or law.
Andrew
I'm not
Cuomo.
sure.
Cuomo, the government.
The governor has passed a law, and that basically goes on to say that if you're a part of the BDS movement, if you are in any way sympathizing, associated with it, the New York state, the state of New York, is going to blacklist you, is going to boycott you. So that's a very strong, I think, move. And this goes on how some of this BDS movement.
Yeah, 1 second. Maybe people are listening don't know what the BDS movement is.
Okay.
BDS is a movement created by activists and concerned citizens around the world. Pretty much means boycott, divest, sanction. It is an economic, let's say, attack on the Israeli state.
On the Israeli occupation, not on the Israeli state.
Yeah, on the Israeli state because the state is occupying Gaza, right?
But it's not an attack on the state's existence, which
Okay,
Yeah,
true.
yeah,
true.
which
Okay,
can
true.
easily be perceived as an
Yeah.
attack as
True.
Well,
as the
Thank you.
as
I'd say
an
it's
anti-Semitism.
I'd call it more, in a public diplomacy point of view, that it's a way to pressurize the state of
It's
Israel.
anti-occupation.
It
Yeah.
targets the occupation, the illegal occupation of the Palestinian territories, the illegal settlements encouraged by the Israeli state, but in no way does it target the Israeli state or the
That's a good
or
point.
the Israeli
It's a good point
citizens.
to make, especially in this climate now of
Yeah.
people saying
Yeah.
that BDS is anti-Semitic just
Right.
because they are against Israeli policies.
Yeah.
And of course, the fallacy there is trying to associate Israel with all Judaism, and then, I guess the Israeli state with its occupation. Because we could have an Israeli state that is not racist and doesn't occupy other lands,
Yeah.
right?
And they could criticize that state for
And still,
then
yeah.
the things that we criticize right now.
Yeah, I mean, all state power can be criticized and often should be criticized.
Totally. I'm all for that.
I'm all for that
Absolutely.
too.
Yeah.
Says the guy wearing "Respect No Authority" T-shirt.
Yeah, now you know that.
Naz mentioned a new development in Tunisia. Would you like to speak
Oh, yeah,
more on this?
Yeah, that's not really a headline. That's something that happened like 2 weeks ago, almost 2 weeks ago. So the Ennahda party that is now in power in Tunisia, that has struggled recently following the Arab Spring. That was the place where the Arab Spring actually grew out of. And so one of the standard, not the standard, but what we saw so far is that the Arab Spring, sort of at least in Tunisia and Egypt, strengthened the more right wing, or let's just say the religious parties. So Ennahda was the leading party. Well, there were 4 parties that came in within the post Arab Spring scenario in Tunisia. Ennahda was one of them, and probably the most popular of them. It was through its existence. It has seen itself as a religious party. So now, very recently, they've passed the constitution and they've claimed, and so they've not claimed. They've gone on to say that they're taking off religion at all from their politics. So the constitution that they've presented claims to uphold a secular society, right? So that's, I think, a big thing in terms of Middle East politics, at least in that part of the world, where as a result of military movements, not military movements, but military occupation or a military government, most of the political forces were either co-opted by the military or they took on, spaces which were not touched by the military, which in this case happened to be the religious institutions, right, where the military could not really enter or penetrate, insofar as it did with other institutions such as universities and trade unions and all that kind of stuff, which were all banned. So the only place, in the historical context, left to organize yourself within those societies were the religious institutions, and as a result, what you see was movements like the Ennahda, the Muslim Brotherhood, and these were the movements that came out in strength out of the Arab Spring. But that was also one of the things that was kind of unsettling to a lot of observers outside the region, which is why we saw, at least in Egypt, that that was cut short with another military coup. And in Tunisia, they had elections which didn't go well, so they had re-elections, and somehow they've now passed a constitution, and probably they're going to be on their way towards more easier times. So yeah, that was one of the things that has happened, and for all of you interested, you could look it up.
Yeah.
Rashid Ghanouchi, he was interviewed recently by Christina Manpour. You could watch that.
So we're nearly out of time, but I would like to, because it just occurred to me, but if we could go really quickly back to the BDS thing, I just want to point out that by accusing people who are critical of Israel, policy decisions, of anti-Semitism, actually weakens the argument for anti-Semitism in general. Yeah, because it's basically if you start to call everything anti-Semitism, then it's no longer clear what anti-Semitism really is. And at some point, people will begin to take anti-Semitism less seriously,
like
because
terrorism.
like terrorism, because it just becomes this blanket accusation for anything. And so anti-Semitism is a real problem. It's something that we should take very seriously. And it needs therefore to remain separate from criticism of Israel's state actions.
Right.
Because any government can be criticized. In fact, we should not, even if you're not an anarchist, you should in principle criticize government when you find government doing something that you find to be morally reprehensible. I mean, these are institutions that,
guys,
and that's it.
Saying it's all out.
All right, guys. You might have noticed the alarm went off. Well, we're doing this new policy here at the Moral Economy. We're trying to make things shorter. We think our podcasts are great. They just might be a little too long, so we're cutting them at 22 minutes.
You want more and more
accessible.
people to listen to them.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so that's why you heard the timer. We'd like to thank you for listening. Sign up to our Facebook page. Check us out on iTunes. We're also on Tumblr and
YouTube.
And we have
YouTube.
a website, www.mainstreamidea.com.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening and
Stay critical, everybody.
Stay critical.
and
Stay
respect
critical,
no
guys.
authority.
Respect no authority.
Respect no authority.
Yeah.
We're sick and tired of all your lies, your unwillingness to compromise. So we'll take it into our own hands. Educate ourselves and take a stand. We're gonna occupy your street, your house, your bank accounts, your everything, yes, everything. Oh, we're here to occupy. I know it, feel it's time we occupy. Hey, I reckon it's a revolution. When it's all said and done, you will find no place to hide, no way